Now that we have most of the work done on the upper and lower hulls in terms of filling seams, sanding them, dressing down the joints, we're going to go ahead and add the cast texture to the front of the hull. Now I've already done the bottom, and I know all you can see is gray. And it has a very slight texture to it. Very slight, and that's what I want, a very slight texture. I've also textured the front gun mantlet the same way. Very slight texture, which will be a little bit different than the texture we have on the other parts of the turret. Now to do this, I just have some primer, and I'm using Stynylrez primer. Now you want a thicker primer to do this, and what we're going to do, take a sea sponge. You can see I've already done the bottom part. Dip it in a little bit of the primer, and then sort of blot it away the same way you would if you were going to do a dry brush or something like sponge chipping later on. So you get a lot of it off because you don't want to put too much down. Then you just take it and to start to blot it down. Now you don't want to cover every square inch of the plate with this because you want the texture to be kind of subtle. But go over the headlight housings, try and get in the front of them. And while we don't want to cover everything completely, we still want to get the texture everywhere. Now, you can kind of tell somewhat the texture look that we're getting. Very subtle, to where when we paint this later on, we'll be able to tell it's there, but it won't be too in your face. Now for the other parts that are kind of hard to get, we have a thinner section of sponge. Do the same thing, and then go sort of in those areas and try and get them textured up as well. Don't worry too much about the sides beside the headlight, because you'll have the headlight cage that goes over those, so it won't be as important to get texture there because a lot of it will be hidden. Need a little bit more primer on the side there for the sponge to get in there and add some texture. And then once you have it layered like that, I go ahead and get a blow dryer and I'll dry it real quick and then do a second coat. Now that the first coat's dry, we'll go ahead and do a second one. Just a few areas, not all of them. Now you want to look where you don't have as much texture, and just try and find a few places where you want to add just a little bit more. And that should be good. Now, one of the things that's nice about Stynylrez is that once it's dried for a couple hours overnight, it sands wonderfully, better than any other acrylic primer that I've used before. But when it's still fairly fresh, what you can do is come along with areas like here where we got stuff where we didn't want it, and you just can lightly scrape it away. And you're not going to damage anything. Part here of the fender, we don't want it on there. So just go around and clean up any areas where you don't want the texture. Now a lot of these areas will be covered by other things, and you can add some chipping effects to some of the areas, but we have here on the side of that fender, we don't want any of that texture there. So we're just going to remove it. And now, after I get all the texture off of where we don't want it, I'll go ahead and hit this with a hairdryer again, then spray some black primer on it, and come back and show you what this texture looks like with some primer on it. We've put some primer down so you can see now the texture that we are working with, that we were able to do with the Stynylrez primer and sponging it on. You can see it's a subtle cast texture compared to what's back here and compared to what's on the sides of the hull, or excuse me, the sides of the turret. And this will give us a good subtle look when we're done. It looks more aggressive now in black than it will later on when we put the olive drab down, but it's an easy, quick way. I mean, this whole process from start to finish took less than 20 minutes. You can also see how when we filled the front seam there with the nail powder, we still have a little line that's left that'll be a good guide for us when we replace that weld seam. And I'll replace the weld seam the same way we did it on the turret. And then once that's done, that should be all the body work that is necessary. Nay, he says. Part of the problem with this kit is there's no detail on the sides of these boxes. Now on the actual M41 Bulldog, there is an X reinforcement on the side of each box and some vertical ribs on these front angled boxes, and it's not present. It's much like what's already on the top here. And what we have, and what we're going to do, is we have some stretched sprue, so thin you can barely see it. There's that one, and then there is this one that we're going to do stretched very thin. Now it's a little bit thinner than what these are on the top. I'll go ahead and lay it across. Hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. It's a little bit narrow, not as wide as what's up on the top of the hull, and it'll give a nice subtle look to the sides, and I'll show how to do that, or how I'm going to do it. But part of the issue is making sure the spacing is right and the size is right, but this will be a good subtle look to the side and to add back some of the detail that to me it does not have on this kit. Now to stretch the sprue, I just used a candle, held it over there, and one of the tricks for getting something this thin, this long, and fairly even is to, instead of just heating up a little middle portion of the sprue when you go to stretch it, heat up something a little bit wider, and when it starts to sag and kind of get melty, keep heating it up, keep heating it up, and keep heating it up. And then when you stretch it, remove it, take it away from that direct heat and stretch it. And when you stretch it out, hold it. When you get it to as long as you want it, just hold it. And hold it like that until it cools down and sets, and that way it won't curl and it won't snap or it won't break. And then after we add that detail, all the parts that we're doing to add details or missing details or to restore things are going to be done for the kit. So I'll go ahead and glue the other parts on after we do that, and then we can move this into primer. So in short order, this should be into paint. So hopefully this has been a good example of a way to add some subtle cast texture. I don't think it works too good for rust because it's a little too soft, but again, as you can tell, as terms of a good subtle cast texture, I think that's pretty good. So hopefully you'll be able to use this. Again, Stynylrez or any thicker primer will work, or you could have done it with a thinned putty. But I think this is faster because you don't have to mix anything, just shake the bottle. Easier because, again, you don't have to mix anything. And it dries nice, it sticks, it won't pull up, and it doesn't stink. So, thanks for watching. Hopefully, we'll have this done pretty soon.